Hello everyone, welcome once again as we continue our Bible study. Last time we read Daniel chapter 1 verses 1 to 4. Verse 5 says, "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king." Let's see what we find interesting in this verse. "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and the king's wine." So the captives were going to receive the same nutrition as the king. Whatever the king ate and whatever the king drank. In other words, the program that King Nebuchadnezzar had was a university degree in which they will be taught the Chaldean language and the Chaldean culture and the Chaldean education. But on top of that, the captives were going to receive the same diet that the king ate. Verse 6, "Now among the captive were children of the tribe of Judah." Remember Judah? Judah is one of the 12 sons of Israel, or Jacob. Jacob was his name, but then his name was changed to Israel. And Judah was the son that said to Jacob, "Send the younger brother with me as we go back to Egypt, and I will be held responsible if anything happens to Benjamin." And Jacob allowed Judah to take Benjamin with him. Now these captives are descendants from the tribe of Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. 4 young men. But there were many other captives. Actually, if you study further the Bible, you will see that there were about 10,000 people that were taken captive on the first round of captivity when Daniel and his friends went with them. And it's interesting that 4 names stand out. And the names are Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 7, "Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego." What is interesting about this verse? The king has a plan for the captives that he has chosen will be part of the court of the king. I wonder what the plan of Nebuchadnezzar is. Why would he put so much emphasis on what they ate and on changing their names? It seems that Nebuchadnezzar understood that saying that says, "You are what you eat." So he was going to feed them a diet that was prevalent in the court of Babylon, because he knew if these 4 young men adopted the way the Babylonians ate, they could become Babylonians. And the king also knew, let me change their names so that they have no remembrance of who they are. So he changes the Hebrew names, which have meaning, and gives them Babylonian names with a different meaning. Did you know that the Hebrew names actually have meaning? Daniel means God is my judge. The name Hananiah means Yahweh is gracious. God is gracious. The name Mishael means who is like God. God is my judge. Jehovah is gracious. Who is like God? And the name Azariah means helped by God. Can you imagine? The captain of the eunuchs changes their name, of course, by order of the king. And now they receive names that reflect the meaning of the gods of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar knew what he was doing. He understood that you are what you eat, so he changes the diet of the captives. And now he changes their names because he knows that with a name like God is gracious, who is like God, God is my judge, they would never forget their identity. Let's read verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Daniel purposes. In other words, Daniel decides that he will refuse to eat what the king eats, and he will refuse to drink the wine that the king drinks. Why? Well, I'm sure Daniel understood that what I eat actually influences my thinking. In order for him to purpose, Daniel understood that he needed the help of God's Holy Spirit in order for him to take such a brave stand to say no to the king's food. Imagine. Remember, Daniel's only 16 years old. Now, this 16-year-old says, I don't care about peer pressure. I'm going to stand on what I believe. Where do you think Daniel got the idea of saying no to the king's meat or to his wine? Right under this verse, there's other verses that you can read as references. And if we go to Leviticus chapter 11:47, and this is what it says. To make a difference between the unclean and the clean, and between the beast that may be eaten and the beast that may not be eaten. You see, Daniel knew that as a Hebrew boy, he had to choose between what he could eat and what he could not eat. Because he was taught in Leviticus 11:47 on what we should eat. There are clean foods and there are unclean foods. And Daniel said, I'm going to be faithful to my God, and I will not eat the king's meat or his wine. And verse 8 continues. Therefore, Daniel requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel purposes, takes the decision at 16 years old to be faithful to the law of God. And the requirements of God was that he should eat only clean meats. But how about the wine? Leviticus didn't say anything about the wine. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. Listen to what it says. Wine is a mocker. Strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived by it is not wise. Leviticus had taught Daniel that there are clean meats and unclean meats. And of course, the diet of Nebuchadnezzar had no guidelines whatsoever. So King Nebuchadnezzar would eat anything and everything he wanted. Not Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar drank everything he wanted. Not Daniel, because Daniel had learned from Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1, that wine is a mocker and is a raging drink. It makes you angry. And whoever drinks strong drinks is not wise. So at 16 years old, Daniel says, I want to be wise. I'm not going to eat like the king, and I am not going to drink like the king. We don't see many teenagers like that, but I know that God has courageous teenagers that stand for truth and that stand for truth. Speaks to the prince of the eunuchs and makes his request. Can you imagine? First, he purposes in his heart. He decides in his heart that he will be faithful to God. Now, then he approaches the eunuch and says, what does he say? He approaches the eunuch and makes the request to allow him not to defile himself, to allow him, to help him to be faithful to his God. I wonder how the eunuch will respond. Well, if you want to know the answer, you have to wait till our next study. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.